The humid air of Georgetown clung to Sarah like a second skin, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn mornings she'd left behind in San Francisco. It was late 1978, and the world outside buzzed with disco and political upheaval. But here, on the edge of the Guyanese jungle, time seemed to slow, almost to a standstill. Sarah, a photojournalist whose career had stalled in a mire of sensationalism and cynicism, had come seeking not just a story, but a new beginning. The People's Temple, with its promise of a utopian socialist community, had seemed like a beacon of hope in a world increasingly devoid of it. She'd heard the whispers, of course, the rumors of strange practices and absolute devotion, but Father John's televised sermons, broadcast with a soothing cadence and an almost hypnotic sincerity, had painted a picture of communal harmony and spiritual enlightenment. He spoke of Paradise Lost, a sanctuary from the corrupting influences of the outside world, a place where true equality and peace could flourish. Her initial interactions with Father John upon arriving at the remote jungle settlement were overwhelmingly positive. He was a man who filled a room, not with physical stature, but with an undeniable presence. His eyes, though piercing, held a warmth that seemed to embrace everyone in his gaze. He spoke of shared dreams, of building a better world, and his words resonated deeply with Sarah's own yearning for purpose. The communal life, at first glance, appeared idyllic. Children played freely, under the watchful eyes of multiple caregivers. Fields of crops stretched towards the dense jungle, and the air hummed with a sense of shared purpose. Everyone seemed genuinely happy, their faces alight with a fervent belief in Father John's vision. Sarah, despite her journalistic skepticism, found herself disarmed, almost seduced by the pervasive sense of belonging. This, she thought, could truly be Eden. Yet, as the days bled into weeks, a subtle unease began to prick at the edges of her initial optimism. The small rules initially presented as necessary for communal living began to tighten their grip. Personal letters were screened, conversations subtly monitored, and access to the outside world became increasingly restricted. The vibrant green of the jungle, once a symbol of untamed beauty, now felt like a suffocating embrace, its dense foliage a natural prison. The distant sounds of exotic birds and unseen creatures, once a symphony, now seemed to mock her growing sense of claustrophobia. She heard whispers, hushed conversations among the older members, about those who had left, or rather, those who had simply disappeared. Their names were spoken in reverent tones, as if they had ascended to a higher plane, but the underlying fear in the eyes of those who spoke them told a different story. It was a fear that suggested not ascension, but erasure. This growing sense of unease culminated one sweltering evening during the communal meal. The air was thick with the aroma of stewed vegetables and the drone of Father John's sermon, delivered from a raised platform at the head of the long dining hall. Suddenly, a woman at a nearby table, seemingly healthy and vibrant moments before, convulsed violently, her eyes rolling back into her head. She collapsed, her plate clattering to the wooden floor. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, quickly stifled by the stern gaze of Father John's enforcers. Father John himself paused, his voice unwavering, and then, with a chillingly calm demeanor, announced that the woman had succumbed to a sudden tropical illness. His eyes, however, held a strange, almost imperceptible shift, a flicker of something cold and knowing that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. It was a look that suggested not sorrow, but satisfaction. The meal continued, the silence punctuated only by the scraping of spoons and the low murmur of Father John's voice, as if nothing untoward had happened. But Sarah couldn't shake the image of that flicker in his eyes, or the unsettling calm that had settled over the entire community. It was the first omen, a crack in the facade of paradise, revealing a glimpse of the darkness beneath. Later that night, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself drawn to the deceased woman's small, Spartan hut. A morbid curiosity, or perhaps a journalist's instinct, compelled her. The hut was empty, stripped of personal belongings, as if its occupant had never existed. But as Sarah's gaze swept across the rough-hewn wooden floor, something caught her eye. A small, intricately carved wooden doll, half hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was a crude, almost primitive carving, but its features were unmistakable. A tiny, unsettling replica of Father John himself, complete with his distinctive, piercing eyes. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. She had seen that doll before, or one exactly like it. Father John kept a similar, larger version in his private study, a seemingly innocuous trinket amidst his collection of religious artifacts. The doll in her hand felt cold, almost sentient, and a chilling thought solidified in her mind. This was no tropical illness. This was a ritual. The doll, a macabre effigy, suggested a deeper, more sinister connection to the woman's death. A connection that spoke of dark magic and malevolent intent, far beyond the realm of mere human manipulation. Days later, the unsettling calm that had settled over Jonestown was shattered by a new, far more terrifying discovery. The woman who had died during the communal meal, whose body had been solemnly buried in the jungle's red earth, was found back in her bed. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the thatched ceiling, her body perfectly preserved, devoid of any signs of decomposition. A collective hysteria gripped the community. Whispers of black magic and dark miracles spread like wildfire. Father John, however, remained unperturbed. He gathered the terrified members, his voice resonating with an unearthly calm, and declared it a miracle, a divine sign of their chosen status, a testament to the power of their faith and his own spiritual authority. He spoke of the woman's return as a blessing, a beacon of hope in a world of doubt. But Sarah, clutching the small wooden doll she had found, saw only a terrifying confirmation of her darkest fears. The doll felt warmer now, almost vibrating with a malevolent energy. The incident, far from bringing comfort, solidified the chilling reality that Jonestown was not just a cult, but a place where the veil between life and death, and between the natural and the supernatural, was terrifyingly thin. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Fear morphed into a twisted reverence, and the lines between reality and delusion blurred even further. For Sarah, the paradise had truly been lost, replaced by a living nightmare. The miracle of the resurrected body, far from bringing solace, had cast a long, chilling shadow over Jonestown. It was a spectacle that had solidified Father John's power, transforming fear into a twisted, almost desperate reverence among the community. For Sarah, however, it was a terrifying confirmation of her deepest anxieties, a grotesque testament to the malevolent forces at play. The wooden doll, now a constant, unsettling companion in her pocket, seemed to thrum with a low, cold energy, a silent witness to the escalating madness. Father John's true nature, once veiled by charismatic rhetoric, began to surface with an alarming ferocity. His sermons, once soothing, now crackled with an almost manic intensity, his voice rising and falling in a crescendo of fire and brimstone. He spoke of external enemies, of the corrupting influence of the outside world, and his demands became absolute, his pronouncements unquestionable. The communal activities, once a source of shared purpose, evolved into endless, exhausting meetings that stretched late into the night, punctuated by loyalty tests and public confessions. Sleep deprivation became a weapon, blurring the lines of reality, making the members more susceptible to Father John's increasingly bizarre pronouncements. Sarah witnessed increasingly harsh punishments for minor infractions. A stolen mango led to public flogging. A whispered doubt to days in the sweltering reflection hut, a small windowless box designed for sensory deprivation. The once welcoming community had transformed into a place of palpable fear and suspicion, where every glance felt like an accusation, every conversation a potential betrayal. It was during this period of escalating control that the first true disappearance occurred. Little Lily, a quiet, bright-eyed girl of 7, had always possessed a defiant spark, a resistance to Father John's hypnotic gaze that Sarah had secretly admired. Lily had a habit of drawing, filling her worn notebook with vibrant, innocent depictions of the jungle, the community, and even Father John himself, always with a slightly mischievous glint in his drawn eyes. One morning, Lily was simply gone. The official explanation, delivered by Father John with a practiced sigh of regret, was that her estranged family had reclaimed her, whisking her away in the dead of night. But the rumors that rippled through the community told a different story, whispers of a more sinister fate, perhaps involving the depths of the jungle, or a re-education by Father John's inner circle. Sarah, remembering Lily's defiant spirit, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Lily had not simply gone home. As the days turned into a suffocating blur, strange occurrences began to plague Jonestown. Unexplained noises echoed from the dense jungle at night, not the familiar chirps and calls of nocturnal creatures, but guttural growls and guttural whispers that seemed to slither through the humid air, just beyond the edge of hearing. Fleeting shadows danced in the periphery of vision, darting between the huts and across the communal grounds, too quick to be anything but tricks of the light, yet too persistent to ignore. Unsettling dreams, vivid and disturbing, plagued the residents, often shared by multiple people, featuring grotesque figures with glowing eyes and the suffocating sensation of being buried alive. These phenomena were initially dismissed as the effects of exhaustion, paranoia, or the oppressive jungle heat, but their increasing frequency and intensity hinted at something far more sinister, a malevolent presence tied to the very land itself, or perhaps to Father John and his increasingly dark influence. Driven by a desperate need to find Lily and a growing suspicion that her disappearance was linked to the unsettling events, Sarah ventured into the jungle, following a faint, almost imperceptible trail that seemed to beckon her deeper into the oppressive foliage. The air grew heavier, the sounds of the commune fading behind her, replaced by the symphony of the jungle, a symphony that now seemed to hum with an unnatural, almost predatory energy. After what felt like hours, she stumbled upon it, a hidden, overgrown path, barely discernible beneath years of tangled vines and fallen leaves. It led to a small, ancient temple ruin, swallowed almost entirely by the encroaching jungle. The stones were slick with moss, and the air within was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cloying. Inside, crude drawings adorned the crumbling walls, not the innocent depictions of Lily's notebook, but disturbing, almost primitive sketches. They depicted Father John, unmistakable in his robes, performing dark rituals, not with the cult members, but with shadowy, non-human figures, beings with elongated limbs and glowing eyes, their forms indistinct, yet undeniably malevolent. It was a horrifying revelation, suggesting a much older, more profound evil at play than just a human cult leader. This wasn't just a cult. It was a continuation, a dark legacy that stretched back into the forgotten history of this cursed land. Returning to her hut, shaken but resolute, Sarah found Lily's worn notebook tucked beneath her pillow. She hadn't put it there. Her heart pounded as she opened it, expecting to see the familiar, innocent drawings. Instead, her breath hitched. The pages were filled with new, disturbing images, drawn with an unnerving precision that was far beyond Lily's artistic capabilities. They depicted future events within Jonestown, scenes of mass hysteria, figures collapsing, and a chilling, almost photographic rendering of the mass suicide, complete with the poisoned drink and the faces of the dying. The details were horrifyingly accurate, depicting events that had not yet transpired. It was as if the notebook had become a conduit for a terrifying foresight, a supernatural influence that had twisted Lily's innocent hand into an instrument of prophecy. The last drawing was of Sarah herself, standing alone amidst the carnage, a look of profound despair on her face, clutching the wooden doll. The doll, still in her pocket, felt like a burning coal. This chapter delves deeper into the psychological conditioning, showing how fear and sleep deprivation erode resistance, making the members vulnerable to both Father John's manipulation and the encroaching supernatural influence. The paranormal elements are no longer subtle. They are direct, terrifying intrusions into reality, blurring the lines between psychological breakdown and genuine supernatural phenomena. Sarah's sanity is now compounded by the terror of disappearances, the shocking discovery of an ancient, unholy alliance between Father John and something unspeakable, and the chilling premonitions of a child, forcing her to question not only her own mind, but the very fabric of reality within Jonestown. The paradise had become a cage, and the serpent in the garden was revealing its true, monstrous form. The chilling prophecy contained within Lily's notebook, coupled with the grotesque discovery of the ancient temple ruins, had shattered any lingering illusions Sarah held about Jonestown. The paradise was a lie, a meticulously constructed facade designed to ensnare and consume. The wooden doll, now a cold, heavy presence in her pocket, felt less like a protective charm and more like a cursed artifact, a tangible link to the burgeoning darkness. Sleep became a luxury Sarah could ill afford, haunted by the prophetic images of mass death and the unsettling knowledge of Father John's unholy alliance. Her journalistic instincts, once dulled by the cult's insidious charm, were now razor-sharp, fueled by a desperate need to understand and perhaps to expose. Father John's grip on the community tightened further, a suffocating embrace that left no room for dissent. Communication with the outside world, already tenuous, was severed completely. The shortwave radio, once a lifeline to distant voices, now broadcast only Father John's increasingly fervent sermons, interspersed with static and unsettling, almost subliminal, whispers. Any attempts to leave were met with severe repercussions, not just threats, but brutal, public displays of power. Sarah witnessed a young man caught trying to slip away into the jungle, dragged back to the communal area, his pleas for mercy ignored. He was taken to the torture hole, a crude, claustrophobic pit dug deep into the earth, barely large enough for a person to stand. For 3 days, His screams echoed through the compound, a chilling symphony of agony that served as a stark warning to anyone contemplating escape. When he finally emerged, he was a broken shell of a man, his eyes vacant, his spirit crushed. He never spoke again, a living testament to Father John's absolute authority. This public spectacle solidified Sarah's understanding of the true extent of Father John's surveillance. A hidden network of informants, eyes and ears everywhere, ensured no thought, no doubt, went unnoticed. The fear was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered any spark of rebellion. As the physical control escalated, so too did the paranormal activity. The jungle, once a source of unsettling noises, now seemed to actively participate in the torment. Residents reported vivid, shared nightmares, not just fleeting images, but full-blown, immersive experiences of being pursued by shadowy figures with glowing eyes, their forms shifting and coalescing from the very fabric of the jungle itself. Sarah herself experienced these terrifying visions, waking in a cold sweat, the oppressive dread clinging to her like a shroud. Grotesque figures, half human, half beast, were seen darting through the trees at dusk, their guttural cries echoing through the night. Ancient, unsettling symbols, crude and disturbing, began to appear around the compound, etched into trees, painted on hut walls, and even carved into the communal dining tables. They were symbols Sarah had seen before, in Lily's notebook, and in the ancient temple ruins, symbols of a malevolent force, seemingly drawn by an unseen hand, or perhaps by the escalating fear and despair of the community. The lines between reality and delusion blurred, making it impossible to distinguish between the psychological torment inflicted by Father John and the genuine supernatural horrors that now permeated every corner of Jonestown. The land itself seemed to awaken, its ancient, malevolent spirit feeding on the fear, growing stronger with each passing day. One sweltering afternoon, as Sarah was tending to the meager vegetable patch, a figure approached her, moving with a deceptive casualness. It was Elias, a man whose unwavering devotion to Father John had always been unsettling. He was a pillar of the community, always the first to praise Father John, the most fervent in his loyalty tests. Sarah braced herself for another lecture, another subtle threat. Instead, Elias leaned in close, his voice a low, urgent whisper, almost lost in the buzzing of insects. "He's not what he seems, Sarah," he murmured, his eyes darting nervously around. "None of this is." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Elias, of all people. He revealed that he had been feigning loyalty for months, a desperate act of self-preservation. He was part of a hidden resistance, a small, terrified group who had seen through Father John's facade. He spoke of secret meetings, of coded messages, and of a growing desperation to escape. He offered Sarah crucial information about Father John's plans, whispers of a grand, final ritual, and, most chillingly, a potential weakness of the entity that had taken root in Jonestown. He described it as a parasitic force, feeding on fear and devotion, and hinted that its power was tied to Father John's own deteriorating sanity. But his sudden appearance, his detailed knowledge, and the sheer audacity of his betrayal left Sarah with a profound sense of unease. Could she trust him? Or was this another layer of Father John's intricate web of manipulation, a test designed to expose dissent? The jungle, with its oppressive silence, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. That night, the paranormal activity reached a fever pitch. The jungle pulsed with an unseen energy, and the air crackled with a malevolent hum. Sarah lay in her hammock, the wooden doll clutched tightly in her hand, trying to block out the guttural growls and the distant, unsettling chants emanating from Father John's compound. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the night. Whispers, faint at first, then growing louder, clearer, forming distinct voices. They were the voices of the dead, the members who had succumbed to the tropical illness, the ones who had disappeared, even little Lily. But these were not the malevolent whispers of the entity. These were desperate, pleading voices, filled with an agonizing sorrow. "Don't trust him." A child's voice, unmistakably Lily's, whimpered. "He feeds on us." Another voice, the woman who had died at the communal meal, cried out, "The doll. It sees, it knows." They revealed secrets about Father John and the entity that even the living cult members didn't know. A hidden chamber beneath the temple ruins, a ritualistic sacrifice planned for the next full moon, and the true nature of the miracle that had brought the dead woman back. They urged Sarah to escape, to expose the truth before it was too late. The voices were a cacophony of despair and warning, a chilling chorus from beyond the grave. Sarah's sense of reality further deteriorated as the psychological manipulation and supernatural occurrences intertwined. The chapter explores themes of paranoia, helplessness, and the struggle to distinguish between internal delusion and external threat, now with the added horror of witnessing extreme physical and psychological abuse, the unsettling ambiguity of a potential ally, and the chilling, desperate pleas from the dead. The weight of their warnings, coupled with the doll's strange warmth, solidified her resolve. She had to escape, not just for herself, but for the silent voices that now echoed in her mind. The desperate whispers of the dead, echoing in Sarah's mind, had solidified her resolve. Elias's revelation, though unsettling in its ambiguity, offered a sliver of hope, a potential path to escape. But the immediate threat loomed larger than any distant promise of freedom. Father John, his eyes now burning with an almost feverish intensity, had announced a series of purification rituals, ostensibly to cleanse the community of the unbelievers and strengthen their bond with the land. Sarah knew with a chilling certainty that these were not rituals of purification, but of sacrifice, designed to feed the malevolent entity that now held Jonestown in its suffocating grip. The first ritual was a grotesque spectacle. Under the oppressive heat of the Guyanese sun, the community gathered in the central clearing, a makeshift altar adorned with strange, unsettling symbols at its center. Father John, draped in ceremonial robes woven from jungle vines, began to chant, his voice a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate in Sarah's bones. Animal sacrifices, initially small jungle creatures, were offered, their blood spilling onto the earth, absorbed by the hungry soil. The air grew thick with the scent of fear and iron. The rituals escalated, becoming increasingly violent and disturbing. Strange concoctions brewed from jungle herbs and other, more unspeakable ingredients were passed around, their consumption leading to vivid hallucinations and a terrifying susceptibility to Father John's commands. Sarah, forced to participate, felt her moral compass shatter with each forced act, each drop of blood spilled. The trauma of forced participation was a constant, gnawing pain, a dark stain on her soul. Then came the day of the grand offering. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness. The jungle sounds muted, as if even nature held its breath. A dissenting member, a young man named Caleb, who had openly questioned Father John's authority, was dragged to the altar, his eyes wide with terror. Father John, his face contorted in a mask of ecstatic fervor, declared Caleb a sacrifice, an offering to appease the ancient spirits of the land. Sarah watched, paralyzed by horror, as Caleb was brutally murdered by Father John and his most loyal enforcers, his screams swallowed by the jungle. His blood, a torrent of crimson, flowed into the earth, absorbed by the same symbols that adorned the altar. It was a direct, horrifying character death, a visceral act of depravity that solidified the cult's descent into pure evil. The act was not just a murder. It was a dark offering, a macabre sacrament designed to empower the unseen entity. As Caleb's lifeblood seeped into the earth, a profound shift occurred. The air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive, malevolent presence. The jungle, which had been unnaturally silent, now seemed to groan, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through Sarah's very bones. The malevolent entity that had been subtly influencing Jonestown, whispering in the shadows, now made its presence overtly known. It didn't manifest as a physical form, not yet, but as a palpable force, a suffocating weight that pressed down on everyone, stealing their breath, filling them with an unspeakable dread. It was a cold, ancient evil, and Sarah felt its gaze, 1,000 unseen eyes piercing her very soul. Then, a voice, not spoken aloud, but telepathic, invaded her mind. "Join us, Sarah. Overthrow him. Take his place. Power awaits you. Survival is yours." The entity offered a twisted bargain. Help it dispose of Father John, and she would become the new leader of Jonestown, promised power and survival in exchange for her loyalty. The offer was insidious, preying on her deepest fears and her desperate desire to escape. It created a profound moral dilemma, a new layer of psychological torment that threatened to consume her. Just as the entity's telepathic voice began to weave its seductive web around her, promising dominion over the terrified cult, the wooden doll in Sarah's pocket began to glow. It was a soft, ethereal light at first, then intensifying, pulsing with a vibrant, protective energy. A high-pitched, agonizing scream, not from a human throat, but from the very air itself, tore through the clearing. The entity's oppressive presence flickered, momentarily faltering, and its telepathic hold on Sarah snapped. The doll, now radiating a warm, comforting light, had broken the entity's grasp, revealing itself not just as a cryptic clue, but as a powerful, albeit mysterious, artifact of protection, a counterforce against the encroaching darkness. The entity, enraged, recoiled, its shadowy presence momentarily diminished. But the message was clear. Sarah was marked, and the battle for her soul, and the soul of Jonestown, had just begun. The entity's chilling offer still echoed in Sarah's mind, a seductive poison that promised power in exchange for her soul. But the doll, now a warm, pulsating presence in her pocket, had been a stark reminder of the true cost of such a bargain. The whispers of the dead, too, served as a constant, agonizing chorus, urging her to fight, to escape. The horror of Caleb's sacrifice, the raw brutality of it, had ignited a desperate spark within her, a refusal to succumb to the madness that was consuming Jonestown. She was no longer just a journalist seeking a story. She was a survivor and a witness. It was this desperate resolve that led her to Elias. His confession, initially met with suspicion, now seemed like a lifeline. He introduced her to a small, clandestine group of disillusioned members, their faces etched with the same fear and desperation that mirrored her own. There was Maria, a quiet, elderly woman who had lost her entire family to Father John's insidious charm. David, a young, athletic man who had once been a fervent believer, but whose faith had been shattered by the increasing cruelty. And Lena, a former teacher, whose sharp intellect had allowed her to see through the facade long before others. They met in hushed whispers under the cloak of night, in the deepest parts of the jungle, far from the prying eyes and ears of Father John's informants. Their plans were crude, born of desperation. A coordinated escape attempt, a dash through the jungle to the river, and then, hopefully, to freedom. They understood the true extent of their entrapment, the dire consequences of remaining, but the pervasive fear and the entity's insidious influence made trust almost impossible. Every shadow seemed to hold a spy, every rustle in the leaves a potential betrayer. The entity, as if sensing their growing descent, actively worked to thwart their plans. It manipulated events, causing tools to break, supplies to vanish, and paths to become inexplicably overgrown. It created discord among the rebels, planting seeds of doubt, using their deepest fears and insecurities against them. Maria's nightmares intensified. David suffered from debilitating panic attacks, and Lena found herself questioning her own sanity, convinced she was being watched even in her sleep. Accidents and unexplained deaths among the rebellious faction became more frequent, each one a chilling reminder of the entity's omnipresent power. A young man who had joined their ranks was found dead in his hammock, his face contorted in a silent scream, his heart seemingly ripped from his chest, yet with no external wounds. It was a clear message. The entity knew, and it was retaliating. The jungle itself seemed to conspire against them, its sounds morphing into mocking laughter, its shadows twisting into menacing forms. The air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread, a suffocating weight that pressed down on their fragile hopes. They were fighting not just a madman, but an ancient, malevolent force that permeated every inch of Jonestown, every fiber of their being. Their rebellion was a flicker against a raging inferno, a desperate act of defiance against an overwhelming darkness. Yet they persisted, fueled by a desperate hope for freedom, and the chilling knowledge that their lives, and perhaps their very souls, depended on it. Their carefully laid plans, however, were doomed. The betrayal came not from Father John's loyalists, but from within their own ranks. Elias, the man who had approached Sarah with promises of a hidden resistance, was the traitor. His true motive was not to escape, but to gain the protagonist's trust and lead the rebellion into a trap, solidifying his own position within the cult and ensuring his own survival. He had been a double agent all along, a master manipulator playing a long game. The revelation was a crushing blow, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. The planned escape became a massacre. Father John's guards, alerted by Elias, ambushed the rebels. Maria, David, and Lena, along with several others, were brutally killed, their desperate cries silenced by the jungle. Sarah narrowly escaped, witnessing the deaths of her allies, their faces contorted in shock and agony. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, a cold, bitter taste in her mouth. Hope, once a fragile flame, was extinguished, replaced by a profound sense of hopelessness. Every relationship was tainted by suspicion, every gesture of kindness now suspect. The entity, it seemed, had orchestrated this, using Elias as its pawn, further cementing its control over Jonestown and its terrified inhabitants. The crushing reality of failed rebellion and the deaths of those who dared to hope, all orchestrated by a trusted ally, left Sarah utterly alone, adrift in a sea of despair. As Sarah fled the carnage of the failed rebellion, a desperate, almost primal instinct for survival driving her deeper into the jungle, she stumbled upon something that chilled her to the bone. Hidden beneath a thick canopy of vines, almost swallowed by the earth, was a hidden bunker. It was not a crude makeshift shelter, but a sophisticated, reinforced structure, clearly not built by the cult members. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. Rows of meticulously organized files lined the shelves, and a reel-to-reel tape recorder sat on a dusty table. With trembling hands, Sarah activated the recorder. The voice that filled the bunker was not Father John's, but an older, more refined voice speaking of Project Paradise, of long-term social engineering, and of the cultivation of psychic energy. The documents revealed a horrifying truth. Father John was not the original leader of the cult, but merely a successor, a carefully chosen pawn in a much older, more sinister lineage of cult leaders. This organization had been performing these rituals for centuries, each one feeding the entity, cultivating its power, and preparing for a grand final harvest. The bunker contained detailed records of previous Jonestowns across the globe, each ending in a similar tragic fashion. And then, a chilling discovery. A file with her own name on it, detailing her background, her vulnerabilities, and her suitability as a potential vessel. The protagonist, by her actions, by her very presence in Jonestown, had been marked as the next in line, destined to become the new conduit for the entity's power. The true horror was not just the cult, but a centuries-old, inescapable legacy of evil, a meticulously planned lineage of suffering. The fragility of hope and the devastating impact of betrayal when every relationship is tainted by suspicion and supernatural interference. Now, with the crushing reality of failed rebellion and the deaths of those who dared to hope, all orchestrated by a trusted ally, and the horrifying revelation of a centuries-old, inescapable legacy of evil, left Sarah with a profound sense of cosmic dread. She was not just a victim. She was a pawn in a game far older and more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The revelation of the hidden bunker and the chilling truth of a centuries-old conspiracy had plunged Sarah into a new abyss of despair. She was not just a victim of a madman, but a pawn in a game far older and more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The file with her name on it, detailing her suitability as a vessel, burned in her mind, a brand of inescapable destiny. The wooden doll, once a symbol of protection, now felt like a ticking time bomb, a constant reminder of the entity's insidious reach. Escape, once a desperate hope, now seemed futile, a mere delay of the inevitable. Yet the instinct for survival, primal and unyielding, still flickered within her. She attempted to use the hidden escape route Father John had revealed in his moment of fleeting lucidity, a narrow, overgrown tunnel leading away from the main compound. But the jungle, once a potential ally, now seemed to conspire against her. A path was blocked by recent landslides, the dense foliage forming an impenetrable wall. Her attempts were met with brutal failure, leading to public humiliation and a renewed sense of despair. Other rebels, emboldened by her initial attempts, also tried to flee, only to be dragged back, their failures serving as grim warnings. One young man, caught trying to swim the river, was found days later, his body bloated and disfigured, a chilling testament to the jungle's unforgiving nature. Father John's power seemed absolute, his pronouncements echoing through the compound, each word a nail in the coffin of their freedom. The entity's grip on Jonestown tightened, making any hope of freedom seem futile. Sarah witnessed these failures, pushing her to the brink of despair, her spirit slowly eroding under the relentless pressure. Then came the horrifying discovery of David, one of Sarah's closest remaining allies from the failed rebellion. He had attempted a desperate escape into the jungle, driven by a desperate, almost suicidal hope. Days later, his dismembered body was found, scattered across a small clearing, partially consumed. The sight was horrific, but what truly chilled Sarah to the bone were the strange, non-animalistic bite marks that marred his flesh. Too precise, too deliberate to be the work of any known jungle predator. It suggested that the jungle itself, or the entity within it, actively hunted those who tried to leave, a sentient, malevolent force that guarded its prey with a terrifying efficiency. The jungle, once a symbol of wild beauty, had become a living tomb, its every rustle and shadow a harbinger of death. The realization that the environment itself was an active, deadly participant in their imprisonment was a terrifying new layer to the horror. As the days bled into weeks, the entire community descended into a collective madness. The lines between reality and delusion completely dissolved. Paranoia became a way of life. Every glance a suspicion, every whisper a conspiracy. Hallucinations were commonplace. Grotesque figures danced in the periphery of vision. Disembodied voices whispered insidious suggestions, and the very air seemed to shimmer with unseen horrors. Violent outbursts became frequent, fueled by sleep deprivation, fear, and the constant oppressive presence of the entity. Members turned on each other, accusing, fighting, their eyes wide with a terrifying, unseeing madness. The entity's influence became overwhelming, driving the residents to irrational and self-destructive behaviors. Sarah herself, the tendrils of madness creeping into her mind, her thoughts becoming fragmented, her grip on reality tenuous. The wooden doll, clutched in her hand, was the only thing tethering her to sanity, its warmth a faint comfort against the encroaching cold of the collective delusion. In the midst of this escalating madness, a strange, almost miraculous event occurred. Sarah, huddled in her hut, the sounds of distant screams and maniacal laughter echoing through the night, heard a soft knock at her door. It was Father John. His eyes, usually burning with a fanatical zeal, were now clouded with a profound weariness, a flicker of something akin to fear. He looked older, gaunt, his charismatic facade stripped away to reveal a terrified, broken man. "It's too strong, Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the din of the night. "I'm not in control anymore. I'm just its puppet." He confessed, in a moment of chilling lucidity, that the entity had grown too powerful, that he was merely its instrument, forced to carry out its will. He spoke of the ancient temple, not as a place of power, but as a prison, a conduit for the entity's malevolent influence. He revealed a hidden escape route, a forgotten passage beneath the main temple, known only to a select few, and most shockingly, a potential weakness of the entity. It was vulnerable to pure, uncorrupted human will, a force it could not comprehend or control. He urged Sarah to flee, to expose the truth to the outside world, to stop the cycle before it consumed everything. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a desperate plea for redemption, a tragic, complex layer to his character that Sarah had never imagined. Then, as quickly as it came, the lucidity vanished, replaced by the familiar, vacant stare, and he turned, shuffling back into the madness of the night, leaving Sarah with a glimmer of hope in the midst of utter despair. Armed with this fragile hope, Sarah sought out the hidden passage Father John had described. It was a tight, claustrophobic crawl through damp earth and tangled roots, the air thick with the smell of decay. Just as she thought she was nearing the exit, a faint, ethereal glow appeared in the darkness ahead. As she cautiously approached, she saw them. A group of figures, their clothes tattered and ancient, their faces pale and unlined, their eyes holding a strange, timeless wisdom. They were the long-lost explorers, the ones whose expedition had vanished decades ago. They revealed that they had been trapped in a temporal loop within the jungle, constantly reliving the events leading up to the massacre, an eternal audience to Jonestown's horror. Sarah's arrival, they explained, had disrupted their loop, a ripple in the fabric of time. Her presence, her unique connection to the entity, had created a momentary fracture, offering a chance for them all to finally escape. But their escape, they warned, risked an even greater temporal paradox, a tear in reality that could unravel time itself. The choice was hers: save herself and the them, or risk unleashing an even greater catastrophe. This mind-bending discovery offered both hope and unimaginable peril, a terrifying new dimension to the horror. This chapter explores the complete breakdown of sanity under extreme duress and supernatural influence. It emphasizes the horror of losing one's mind and being trapped in a shared nightmare, where the only escape seems to be death, now with the terrifying implication that the environment itself is an active, deadly participant in their imprisonment. The shocking revelation that the architect of their suffering is also a victim, and the mind-bending discovery of a temporal anomaly that offers both hope and unimaginable peril. Sarah's struggle was no longer just against Father John and the entity, but against the very fabric of time and reality, a battle for her sanity and the fate of existence itself. The revelation of the time loop and the desperate plea of the long-lost explorers had added a terrifying new dimension to Sarah's struggle. The choice was hers: escape and risk unraveling time itself, or stay and face the inevitable horror of Jonestown. The wooden doll, now a constant warm presence in her hand, seemed to pulse with a faint, reassuring light, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Father John's fleeting lucidity, his confession of being a puppet, had offered a sliver of hope, a potential weakness in the entity's armor. But the madness of Jonestown was reaching its crescendo, and the time for choices was rapidly running out. The air in Jonestown grew thick with a palpable sense of dread, a suffocating premonition of doom. Father John, his eyes now completely devoid of humanity, announced the final offering, a mass suicide. The words hung in the humid air, a death knell for the community. The scene was chaotic, a horrifying tableau of despair and fanaticism. Some members, their minds completely broken by fear and indoctrination, willingly lined up, their faces vacant, almost serene. Others, a desperate few, resisted, their screams quickly silenced by Father John's enforcers. The poisoned drink, a sickly sweet concoction, was prepared in large vats, its fumes mingling with the oppressive jungle air. Its consumption was a horrifying ritual, a macabre communion of death. Sarah watched, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, as families embraced, their final moments a tragic display of love and resignation. She saw children, their eyes wide with confusion, being led to the vats by their parents, their innocence about to be irrevocably shattered. Then the unthinkable happened. Her gaze locked onto a small figure, a child she had grown fond of, a young boy named Thomas, who had often sought solace in her presence. He was being physically restrained by two of Father John's most zealous followers, his small body writhing, his pleas for his mother echoing through the clearing. His mother, her face a mask of despair, was being held back, forced to watch. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had to do something. But before she could move, before she could even scream, the poisoned drink was poured down Thomas's throat. His small body convulsed, his eyes rolled back, and he fell, lifeless, before her eyes. The horror was absolute, a personal agony that eclipsed all other terrors. This wasn't just a mass death. It was the murder of innocence, a direct, brutal assault on her last vestiges of hope. The scene personalized the horror, making her survival, if it came, even more agonizing, a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. As the members succumbed, their bodies littering the ground, the entity revealed its full, terrifying form. It was not a shadowy figure, not a disembodied voice, but a colossal, amorphous mass of swirling darkness, tendrils of black energy reaching out, feeding on the dying breaths and despair of its victims. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, its form shifting, coalescing into grotesque, nightmarish shapes, faces of the dead, twisted and screaming, emerging from its depths. The air grew cold, filled with the cacophony of 1,000 dying souls, their screams and last gasps absorbed by the monstrous entity. Sarah, perhaps through a desperate act of defiance, a primal surge of will, or a momentary lapse in the entity's overwhelming control, witnessed this horrific spectacle. She understood then, with a chilling clarity, the true nature of the evil they had faced. It was not just a cult, not just a madman, but an ancient, parasitic force that fed on human suffering, a cosmic horror that had found its perfect breeding ground in the despair of Jonestown. The doll in her hand vibrated violently, its light flickering as if struggling against the overwhelming darkness. Driven by a desperate need to escape this living nightmare, Sarah scrambled towards the hidden passage Father John had revealed, the one the explorers had used to enter the time loop. The path was treacherous, littered with the bodies of the fallen, their vacant eyes staring up at the jungle canopy. Just as she reached the entrance, a chilling sight stopped her dead in her tracks. Blocking her path was not the entity, but a group of children, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly, malevolent light. They were the corrupted children, the entity's new chosen vessels, their innocent faces twisted into expressions of malevolent glee. They moved with an unnatural grace, their small hands outstretched, their voices a distorted chorus of childish laughter and guttural growls. The protagonist, who had just witnessed the horrific death of a child, was now faced with a final, horrifying moral test. Fight her way through these corrupted innocents to survive, or succumb to the overwhelming evil. Just as the corrupted children began to close in, their small, glowing eyes fixed on her, the wooden doll in Sarah's hand began to hum, a low, resonant vibration that intensified with each passing second. It glowed with a blinding, ethereal light, a pure white energy that pulsed outwards, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. The children shrieked, their malevolent glee replaced by agonizing pain, their small bodies recoiling as if struck. They stumbled back, their glowing eyes dimming, their twisted faces contorting in agony, before they turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the jungle. The doll, it seemed, was not just a protective artifact, but a key to disrupting the entity's control over its vessels, a beacon of hope in the heart of despair. It was a miraculous, last-minute intervention, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, a flicker of light could still exist. This is the climax of the psychological horror, depicting the ultimate act of self-destruction driven by manipulation and fear. The protagonist's survival, even if temporary, is marked by profound trauma and the indelible memory of witnessing pure, unadulterated evil, now with the added burden of a loved one's forced death, the horrifying realization that the entity has corrupted the most innocent among them, and a miraculous last-minute intervention from a mysterious artifact. Sarah, clutching the now faintly glowing doll, stumbled into the hidden passage, leaving behind the carnage of Jonestown, but carrying with her the indelible scars of Paradise Lost. The escape from Jonestown was a blur of terror and adrenaline. Sarah stumbled through the hidden passage, the faint glow of the wooden doll her only guide, the screams of the dying, and the triumphant roar of the entity echoing in her ears. She emerged into the pre-dawn jungle, physically and psychologically shattered, but alive. The outside world, when she finally reached it, struggled to comprehend the horror she had witnessed. News reports spoke of mass delusion, of a charismatic madman, of a tragic cult suicide. They dismissed the supernatural, the entity, the whispers of the dead, as the ravings of a traumatized survivor. Sarah tried to tell her story, to expose the true nature of the evil, but her words were met with skepticism, pity, or outright disbelief. She was a survivor, yes, but also a pariah, haunted by memories no one else could understand. Years later, the scars of Jonestown remained, not just on her psyche, but on her very being. The jungle, it seemed, had followed her home. She was plagued by visions and nightmares, not just of the massacre, but of the entity, its shadowy form lurking in the periphery of her vision, its chilling whispers a constant companion in her mind. The wooden doll, now a dull, inert piece of wood, offered no comfort, only a reminder of the horrors it had witnessed. She discovered with a growing sense of dread that the entity had latched onto her, subtly influencing her life, drawing her back towards the now overgrown and desolate Jonestown site. It manifested in small, insidious ways. Objects moving on their own, cold spots in her apartment, the faint scent of decay in the air. The horror was not over. It had merely followed her home, manifesting in her daily life and threatening to consume her entirely. Her struggle became one of survival against both her own profound trauma and the persistent supernatural threat, a battle she fought in the lonely confines of her mind. Driven by a desperate, almost suicidal need to end the cycle of evil, to sever the parasitic link that bound her to Jonestown, Sarah returned to the ruins. The jungle had reclaimed the compound, its dense foliage swallowing the remnants of the huts, the communal hall, even the torture hole. The air was heavy with a lingering malevolence, a palpable sense of despair. She carried with her the wooden doll and a desperate plan, born of the whispers of the dead and the fragmented memories of Father John's confession. She would perform a ritual, not of sacrifice, but of banishment, using the doll as a conduit, a weapon against the entity. She found the ancient temple, now almost completely consumed by the jungle, its crude drawings still visible on the crumbling walls. She began the ritual, chanting the words she had heard in her nightmares, the words whispered by the dead, the words that spoke of pure, uncorrupted human will. The doll began to glow, its light growing brighter, pushing back against the oppressive darkness that permeated the ruins. The entity shrieked, a sound that tore through the very fabric of reality, a sound of pure agony and rage. It writhed, its shadowy form flickering, struggling against the power of the ritual. Sarah pushed, pouring every ounce of her will, her trauma, her defiance into the doll, into the ritual. The entity began to recede, to dissipate, its malevolent presence weakening. Victory was within her grasp, but in the final moments, as the entity seemed on the verge of complete annihilation, a horrifying truth was revealed. The entity was never a separate being. It was a manifestation of the collective darkness within the cult members, a psychic entity born from their fear, despair, and suppressed rage. It was the embodiment of Jonestown's collective trauma, a monstrous reflection of their lost paradise. Sarah, by returning and confronting the past, by focusing her will and her trauma, had inadvertently become the new focal point for this darkness, the new vessel for the entity. The ritual had not destroyed it. It had merely transferred it. The wooden doll, now glowing with a dark, pulsating light, embedded itself into her flesh, becoming one with her. She was the new Father John, destined to perpetuate the cycle of horror. The story ends with Sarah, now subtly changed, looking out over the overgrown ruins of Jonestown, a chilling smile on her face, her eyes holding the same cold, knowing flicker she had once seen in Father John's. She had become the very thing she fought against, the new serpent in the garden, ready to invite new souls to her own twisted paradise. Just as the protagonist fully embraces their new role as the new Father John, a group of government agents who have been tracking the paranormal activity in Jonestown for decades arrive. They are a shadowy, well-equipped unit, their faces grim, their movements precise. They reveal that the entire Jonestown incident was not a mere cult tragedy, but an elaborate experiment orchestrated by a shadowy government organization to study and weaponize the entity. Father John was merely a pawn, a controllable variable in their grand design. The entity, they explain, is a powerful psychic amplifier, capable of manipulating collective consciousness, and they intend to harness its power. The protagonist is now faced with a choice: become a weapon for the government, a controlled conduit for the entity's power, or fight against both the entity and its new masters, realizing that the true horror was never just the cult, but the lengths to which power will go to control the uncontrollable. The story ends with Sarah, now subtly changed by the entity's influence, standing at a crossroads, the jungle behind her, the agents before her, the chilling realization that the fight for her soul, and perhaps the world, has only just begun.